Today I'll show you how to create a responsive navbar in HTML and CSS. And as you can see, once we get to a phone, for example, we are switching to this view, and depending on the size of our screen, we will have a different navigation bar. We are going to start by creating a basic template for our HTML file. Inside of this template, we will link our style sheet by using link:/CSS and linking our style.css file. Now, inside of our body, we can create a nav element, and inside of this nav element, let's imagine we want to have a couple of links. So let's create an anchor tag, for example, and let's say this is our home page, for example. And now we could, for example, say this links our index.html file, so this basically links exactly this file. Now let's copy this anchor tag a couple of times, and let's say this one is, for example, the men's section, this one is the women's section. Then we also have an About Us page, and let's also say we have a contact page. And now we maybe have to create those pages. So we can, for example, say man.html, women.html. So now I've created all of those pages. So let's go inside of our index.html, and let's say we are here targeting our man.html, our women.html, our about.html, and our contact.html. Once we save this file and open it inside of our browser, we have this navbar basically, which already works. So as you can see, now we're getting to our man's page. So since we don't have anything on this page, we're not seeing anything. So let's get back, and we have all those links. But obviously those links are really looking terrible. So what we can do, we can start to style our navbar. And in order to do so, we are going to go inside of our style sheet. First of all, we use the universal selector to set the margin to 0, the padding to 0, and the box sizing to border box for our entire document. And now we're going to target our navbar, saying we want to have a background, for example. And let's say we are going to pick black, but we want to have a slightly different version basically. So let's use some dark gray, for example, like so. And now let's say we want to have padding of 20 pixels top bottom, and let's say also 20 pixels left right, and maybe we can go to 25 pixels. Now we also want to style our A element, so our anchor text inside of this navbar. So we can say nav A, and now we want to have a color of white, for example. We want to have a text decoration of none, so now it looks like this. And maybe we also want to use a display of flex for our nav bar. So for this navbar, we are saying this should have a display of flex. Now let's say to the left of our navbar, we also have our logo. So this could be logo, for example. So now we have this logo, which we want to have aligned to the left. And we have those items that we want to have aligned to the right. So let's put those ones inside of a div. So this here is a container, and this here is an anchor tag. So we have two items inside of this nav flex box essentially. So what we can do is we can say, we set this to display flex, and we have justify content of space between. So now we will have some space between this anchor tag and this container, because those are the two direct child elements. And now we get this effect essentially. So let's also take a look at this in the full screen mode. So we have the logo right here, and we have our elements right here. Still doesn't look perfect. So let's start to style our logo by using .logo. And let's say this one has a font size of maybe 1.6 rem, for example, and a font minus weight of bold. So we're going to target the logo inside of this element, this anchor tag, and we're going to give this one the class of logo. So now we have this logo effect. Let's say our entire body gets a different font family. So we can say we want to have a font family of system UI, for example. And I think this font looks pretty nice. So now we have this font. And I also want to have maybe a slightly bigger font size. So let's use maybe 2 rem. So we get this effect. But as you can see, this here is aligned in a pretty bad way. And the reason for this is that we just set our justify content property, but we didn't set our align items property. So we need to say align items to center them on the vertical axis, so on the secondary axis. And as you can see, now our items are aligned vertically. But now we can maybe also reduce the padding slightly to get a better effect. And maybe we want to have 15 pixels top bottom, but let's use 30 pixels left right to get a little more space right here. Or let's actually even say 40 pixels. Now I also want to have a slight gap between those items, so between this element. So in order to do so, we can say this here is the class link minus container. So this is the container for our links. We're going to copy this class and style it inside of our style sheet by using .link container. Now we also want to use a display of flex. So why do we use a display of flags even though they are already aligned horizontally? We can use a display of flags to now define a gap for our elements. So we can say, now that we have display of flags, we want to have a gap of maybe 20 pixels between our items. Or let's actually even use 25 pixels. So feel free to use whatever value you want to use there. But as you can see, we now have this effect right here. So now we have a nav bar that works on desktop, but this one will probably look pretty bad on mobile. So if we take a look, you can see that this is the nav bar that we have on mobile. So let's use an iPhone 12 Pro. And as you can see, this really looks pretty terrible. So imagine we want to remove the logo, for example, once we use the mobile version and only display all of those icons essentially. So in order to do so, we can now say we are going to define a media query. So let's use add media screen and max width colon. So as you see, we're going to reduce the size, and once we get to anything below approximately 600 pixels, it probably really doesn't look too good anymore. So we will define a media query for a max width of 600 pixels, and we want to say once we get below 600 pixels, we want to switch to a mobile view navbar. So we can say that our .logo should get a display of none basically, so it should disappear from the page. So as you can see, once we get below 600 pixels, our logo disappeared. Now for our link container, we want to use a flex direction of column. So we want these items to be aligned vertically. So let's say dot link container is now having a flex direction of column. So our items will be aligned vertically, but it would also look a little bit nicer if we would have them aligned to the center. And in order to do so, we can say right here that now on the secondary axis, so we need to use align items, we want to have them centered. So as you can see, they are now centered right here, but the entire container needs to be centered inside of this container as well. And as you can see, if we inspect our elements right now, they're inside of this link container, and this link container is inside of this nav bar. But this link container is not centered right now. So we need to give this nav container, or we need to be able to center this link container inside of this nav bar. So let's go ahead, let's select our nav element, and we're now going to say we want to have a justify content of center and align items of center essentially. And as you can see, now our items are aligned. So now this is what it looks like on a tablet, for example. This is what it would look like on an iPhone, iPad Air, Surface Duo, and so on. So as you can see, this website is fully responsive.